Hello, I'm Dr. Jessica Ashe, founder of Mindset News. Today we have an exciting session on diversity, equity, and inclusion in academic publishing. I'm honored to be joined today by Dr. Kimetta Hairston of Bowie State University. Among other accomplishments, she's the author of The Black Experience and Navigating Higher Education Through a Virtual World. Welcome, Dr. Hairston.
Thank you so much, Jessica, for having me here, Dr. Ashe. I really appreciate it. I've been at Bowie State now coming up on 10 years, but my actual background is Penn State University, the University of Hawaii, and now Bowie State University. So I'm very proud to say that I've had 3 exceptional experiences dealing with diversity, equity, and inclusion, from a predominantly white institute to a minority serving institute, and now at a historically Black college, the first historically Black college university in the state of Maryland. So thank you for having me today.
Very exciting. And we'll move on. We're also joined by Dr. Pamela M. Leggett-Robinson. She is the founder and CEO of PLR Consulting. Among other accomplishments, she is the author of Overcoming Barriers for Women of Color in STEM Fields, Emerging Research and Opportunities. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Leggett-Robinson.
Thank you for having me. It's such an honor to be here and talk about this very important topic. I have over 15 plus years in higher education, moving up the ranks to department chair. And so I understand full well what these barriers look like for everyone, especially the women of color and Black women, as they are looking to get tenure and promotion. This area is very important, and oftentimes is the stifling area of their success. And so, as you can see, I've got several books, but my latest book is Demystifying the Tenure and Promotion, a resource for Black women, and it talks about these very things. So I am very happy to be here and engage in this conversation today. Thank you so much, Dr. Ashe.
Welcome. And we are also joined by Dr. RaMonda Horton with Midwestern University, among other amazing accomplishments. She is the author of Critical Perspectives on Social Justice in Speech Language Pathology. Thank you for being here today, Dr. Horton.
Thank you, Dr. Ashe. I'm honored to be here and be a part of the panel discussing and talking about how to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in academic publishing. It's a topic that's near and dear to my heart. As many of the panelists have noted, this is sometimes a challenge for scholars of color or for anyone who's doing work in research and scholarship, looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I'm honored to be here to sort of talk about some of the experiences that I've also had at multiple universities as well. Thank you.
My pleasure. And we are also joined by Brittany Haynes with IGI Global. Thank you for being here, Brittany. It's worth note that we've all published with IGI Global.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here today with so many of our researchers. I know Nick Newcomer, our Senior Director of Marketing, he was going to join us today, but unfortunately he had a family emergency that he had to attend to, a personal matter. So I know he really wanted to be here. I've had the pleasure of working with many of you one-on-one as well for promoting your publications when I worked on the author relations side of things. And even for those of you I didn't work as much directly with, it's just, we've gotten such great responses for your titles that we were just featuring and as part of our diversity, equity, and inclusion ebook collection. So just a little bit about us. I've been with the company for just a few years now. Now I work with our e-collections. Nick has been with the company for over 10 years. We've always been, for the past 30 years since the inception of our company, really focused on diversity and inclusion since the get-go, making sure that we are prioritizing research over profit. So whether that's publishing across the board, making sure that everyone is represented as long as their ideas and research are innovative and they follow that peer review process and they have the credentials, we want to make sure that everyone has a voice, even if it's a niche or underrepresented topic or geographical region, whether it be race, gender, anything like that. So just really excited to be here today with everyone.
Thank you, Brittany. And it's worth noting that I didn't introduce myself. I did say I'm the founder of Mindset News, but as far as my publication goes, I holistically support international students. And that was the book chapter that is in the IGI book that my audience knows that I work with international students, and one of my missions is to help people in developing nations get their voice on the global stage where they belong. There are many valuable, amazingly valuable people in developing nations that are marginalized. And we have a lot of interesting topics to discuss regarding marginalization and how we can end that. And I'm particularly intrigued by a question of Kimetta's. And her question reads, why do you feel the pandemic heightened the attention of race and disparities in the US specifically, but also across the world? So I'll go first to Kimetta, and then anyone else who wants to engage with that question, feel free to raise your hand.
All right, thank you. So from the book, it was 2020. Everybody's on lockdown from the higher education perspective. Literally on March the 13th, the governor started doing the stay-at-home orders. And at Bowie State University, we had never been an online university. So our students, our faculty, our staff, they were forced into a remote world. And during that same time, people were just panicking because, of course, the pandemic was coming about. Loved ones were passing away. A lot of just anxiety in itself. So the book actually came about because I was talking to a lot of my colleagues, a lot of my friends, and we were like all having this same experience. So that's why it's called the Black experience. All the authors are Black, but like the experience was not just about being in a remote world. It was about being Black during 2020, because not only were we, some people were losing their jobs, they were having mental health issues. There was a digital divide, lack of resources, where we really found out how our students, some didn't even have laptop computers at home, or they were sharing a computer with a family of 5. So we had to, once the pandemic brought all this to height, we found, money was all of a sudden given to us for additional resources. That's number one. But at the same time, we're dealing with the death of George Floyd, which, yes, several hundred of Black men and women have been murdered in the United States. But George Floyd, for some reason, it was heightened because everyone was at home looking at the TV. So when everybody started coming together and talking about racism and critical race theory, as Black people, we're like, hello, this has been here forever. This is not something new. We've been marching, since the 50s and the 60s. But so I don't say it was discovered. I say it was heightened. And it was heightened because of the pandemic. So you always say, there's a chapter in my book called, I can't remember what it is, by Dr. Moy. And she just talks about what it's like to be in a pandemic as a Black person, but then what it's also like being in a pandemic. Is it a curse or is it a blessing? And I say it's both, because it heightens racism. It heightened racism to a point where people were really starting to look at it, and people were really actually starting to get involved in the movement. The momentum is kind of still there. We're grateful that, George Floyd's murderers were, convicted. We're also seeing other things in the news now where people are being held responsible for killing Black men and women. And so I say that COVID-19 really heightened racism and allowed a lot of conversations to come out about mental health, about disparities in education, disparities in healthcare, and just disparities amongst people of color in general.
Well, that's quite a lot.
And I know I talk fast. I got a little bit of New York in me too, so bear with me.
Yeah, so do I. You're welcome here. I'm happy to. Yes, go ahead, RaMonda.
I want to just sort of piggyback on what Dr. Hairston brought up, especially as it relates to schools and healthcare. So I'm in speech language pathology, and by practice, my work practically has impact for schools and healthcare. And I've worked as a public school speech therapist. So when I think about how the pandemic sort of highlighted the racial disparities, I think about the already existing opportunity gaps that we have, particularly in our Black Black communities when we think about some of the academic outcomes. And I think about some of the schools that some of our Black low-income students attend, where they did not have access to some of the technology necessary for engaging in remote learning, and what that means for looking at and thinking about these opportunity gaps that we had already been talking about prior to the pandemic. Looking at how schools support students from Black and Brown communities, or students who come from low income homes, thinking about what it looks like to go remote, to come back, to go remote, what supports were not in place, for the teachers to be able to engage in that, particularly in our low income schools. And then when I think about it on the health side, for individuals with disabilities outside of school settings, maybe in healthcare, telehealth, there was a lot that was not in place as it relates to regulations for telehealth and how that needed to happen within the context of the pandemic, and who was going to get billed and not billed, how families, when we think about adults with disabilities, how are they able to access telehealth if they don't have the technology available to them? So these are all things. I think that's a great question that you posed, Dr. Hairston, and that's how I see those sort of disparities, how they got exacerbated during the pandemic.
Yeah, and did you want to say anything about that, Dr. Hairston?
No, I'm just thank you, RaMonda. I really appreciate that, because it's interesting in the book because we have such an array of topics, from healthcare, mental health, police brutality, and even we had a chapter, chapter 2, talking just about what you just mentioned, how schools had to deal with our student teachers. You have to be fingerprinted to go into schools. How can you fingerprint remotely? It's not possible, right? How can you service students from an online platform and still get them the type of education that they need? And most importantly, I have certification in diversity and disability. People with disabilities were severely impacted during the pandemic because their schedules were interrupted. So you're right. I just want to say that's it. I really appreciate what you're saying. So thank you.
Yeah, and it's worthy of note that I found the same thing as I started working more internationally. And I'll explain that. So when the pandemic started, I founded Mindset News to inspire youth around the world to continue their education despite the chaos. And what that means is I was Zooming in Pakistan, and then Afghanistan, and then Iraq, and then I would end one session and go to another. And most of those people were joining on their iPhone. And when you ask people in developing nations, well, can you join by computer? They say, oh, my computer's broken, or something like that. So this disparity exists really everywhere, I think, except maybe the white world. And that's unfortunate. I'm very honored to be joined by people who were all trying to find solutions in that situation. And I often say we are defined not by any situation that we find ourselves in, but by our response to it. And everyone in this room was trying to bridge gaps in different parts of the world. And so I'm very happy to have conversations around educational leadership, which is what I see this room to be focused on.
I was going to say on that. So I was just going to say with that too, because I think just the mention of accessibility and access during this time you all have been bringing up. So that obviously touches on something we've been seeing twofold. Like we've been seeing that from the researcher perspective, needing to access their libraries' resources, working directly with the libraries too. And I think a big part of this is just making sure that in academic publishing and in the market, making sure that those different options are available. So I know a big feedback we've been getting throughout the pandemic has been accessibility, VPATs. What kind of options do you have for everyone? What are you doing to enhance for those who may be disabled or may have accessibility issues to access this actual academic publishing that we're putting out there? Because if people can't access it, then how are we supposed to use it to kind of enhance the academic community and make sure that everything that Dr. Horton, Dr. Hairston, and Dr. Leggett-Robinson are putting out there, and then Dr. Ashe, you too, of course, actually gets seen. So that's been a big part of the conversation. And so I know we've been working to enhance our WCAG compliance throughout the years. And then also just different access options. So working with your library, I think one thing I just wanted to note with researchers and students and faculty, usually publishers and platforms can offer various options. There's not only IP authentication, but I know that gets hard too with everyone as they kind of disperse, and they might have accessibility issues at home, or they might not be the proxy IP addresses. So even things like username and password being other
Right.
options, very important. But I know, Pamela, I think I saw you raise your hand earlier, so I wanted to pass it off to you, but I did just want to bring that up as well, just making sure that like publishers and platforms are offering those flexible options for everyone so they can access all your important research too.
Go ahead, Dr. Leggett-Robinson.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on the disparities during the pandemic as well. But I wanted to comment on them based upon, from the academic productivity perspective for women of color and just women in general. You know, when everyone went to a virtual space, one of the things I don't think the nation thought about was the dynamics within a household and what that looks like. So there's already dynamics within a household pre-COVID, where women, especially women of color, typically had cultural dynamics that were different than others. And so what we find with women of color is typically they are the caregiver. And if they have a husband or a partner, then they are the caregiver as well for that person, their partner's family. So when the pandemic hit, it not only put the burden on that woman, but it overtaxed the woman. And in that space, we all saw the level of productivity for academic research, for academic writing, it plummeted. It went all the way down to the floor because women were already saddled with the cultural taxation. They were already saddled with just inequity of scholarly value. They were already saddled with emotional labor while they were on campus. But so then we go to the virtual space. You've got all those things still vying against your time, but at the same time, you are giving care to your children, your elders, and your spouse. And so the pandemic just exasperated all of that. And like I said, I think this conversation around academic publishing and scholarly work is so pivotal because if we don't change some of the things that were going on pre and now, it's going to be very difficult for women to continue in this space.
Thank you. Go ahead, Dr. Hairston.
No, I just wanted to piggyback off of that. So, for example, at Bowie State University, you know, over 80% of our students, they have to work. You know, they're in school, but they're working full-time jobs. And I just wanted to share this story. You're online, the camera's off, right? Mm-hmm. It's not funny, but it's very creative. But all of a sudden, the mute button got unmuted, and we realized that one of our students is delivering packages for Amazon and in class online. So she's working, she's delivering packages, she's trying to focus on schoolwork. And you're like, you know, what in the world? So I just want to say thank you for sharing that, because if you have to work a full-time job and then you're thrown into this remote world where you just have to keep, you know, going and going. And like you said, taking care of your family members. A lot of people don't understand that disparities because, you know, a lot of people go to school. I can even use my daughter as an example. She's now a lawyer. I got to plug that in. But she worked her butt off to get scholarships. But she's also coming from a middle-class family, right? She was an A student. But then you have another group of people who actually are paying their way through college and trying to figure it out. And then you get hit with the pandemic. So I just appreciate that you brought that up. Thank you so much.
Yeah, our pleasure. So we have some other very interesting topics to go into as well. We had one question from Dr. Horton, excuse me. What barriers persist in disseminating scholarship in DEI, and what supports need to be in place for that? How would you like to start that conversation, Dr. Horn?
So thank you. I think in thinking about that question, one of the things that is always interesting for me is that when you do work related to diversity, equity, social justice, inclusion, you are really sort of setting yourself up to go into an arena where you're challenging the status quo, pretty much. And what that does, it situates you in a way where one of the barriers that perhaps pops up has to do with the emotional labor that Dr. Leggett-Robinson just talked about. But it also situates you in such a way that people that still view diversity and equity and race scholarship as sort of fluff, where you're constantly having to make sure that you establish your expertise in the area and that you make it clear that this is scholarship. So those are some barriers. People still view it as sort of fluff. They don't take it seriously. The emotional labor piece is huge, particularly when it comes to disseminating your work. And I don't know about other people. I know in other fields, everybody's way ahead of my field, I'll say, in how to talk explicitly about issues related to race, issues related to systemic kinds of factors related to ableism and heteronormativity and those kinds of things. But in some fields, there has never been a way to do that because race scholarship has not entered into those dynamics. And so what it means is that trying to disseminate it within the context of those types of fields also puts your candidacy for things like tenure and promotion and how you're evaluated, it puts it at risk in some ways. And there needs to be a way, I think, for when we think about those barriers, that there are other supports in place to sort of help deal with those kinds of things. And so I'll leave it there because I feel like especially Dr. Leggett-Robinson probably has a lot to say on that. So yeah.
We'll add a spotlight for her and let's get the conversation going. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for that. And yes, I was over here chomping at the bit, ready to get in there. Everything you said was so true, so valid. Quick anecdote. I was talking to a support group that I meet with every Wednesday night. And thank you so much, IGI, for the book, because authors in the book have a support group, and we have met for the last 2 years every single week.
That is so great to hear.
So in this support group, we help each other write. Well, I am a chemist by training. I have a PhD in physical organic chemistry. I did bench work for quite a number of years, knowing it's programmatic stuff, and really like to focus on STEM education. Well, chemistry is one of those fields, as you said, Dr. Horton, that they just don't even get it. And so this young woman in the group, all of us actually submitted a commentary, a 1,500 word commentary on deficit teaching in chemistry, which is actually part of DEI, right? How we teach our students of color, how we think about them in a different space of not being less than, right? And so it came back the first time with 2 revisions. It came back the second time with 5 revisions. It came back the third time with 7 to 10 revisions. The revisions had nothing to do with the content. The revisions had to do with the words. They didn't want to use historically marginalized. They didn't want to use underrepresented minorities because one of the reviewers actually said there was no such thing.
Oh my
So
God.
then as it went to the actual publisher, and this is a huge journal. It came back and said, well, you will no longer be able to submit this under the special issue for DEI because now it needs major revisions. So as we talk about people of color and how this DEI space truly impacts how we do our work, what it really does is on the tenure track, it can devalue your scholarship. And so when you think about retention of people of color and just diverse groups in higher education, in the academy, it really devalues the scholarship. It makes it so much less inclusive than what it should be. So what I found in my travels is that people that want to write and be in that space wait until they get tenure. Or better yet, not even tenure, they wait till they're full. But if we go back and we look at the actual statistics for the number of people that go from assistant to associate to full, the number dwindles. And it's not just a number that dwindles for African-American women, it's a number that dwindles for everybody. And so if we don't start valuing what we're talking about in this DEI space, if we don't really start looking at it from the broader context, instead of just being top down, bottom up, it has to be a form in the middle, then I think we're going to continue to have these conversations around the devaluation of scholarship in DEI.
It's very shocking to me. What I don't understand is that it's known that diversity of thought increases innovation. And like, to deny the lack of diversity is a joke. It's a sad joke. It's a sad commentary on humanity. And it's maybe I have different blinders on, but one of my core philosophies is co-rising, that we all have to rise together. If one country or one race is doing awesome and then 15 countries can't feed their people, then we as humanity sink. And I don't know why the rest of the world doesn't get that. I don't know that that was necessarily a question, but really a commentary about how sad that is. And there was a famous, he called himself an educationalist. And many of you may know Dr. Ken Robinson, who spoke about education in diversity in similar ways that he used an analogy of farmers and planting. And a good farmer knows that for his soil to be rich, and there's the metaphor, he must plant diverse set of crops, switch from wheat to corn and soy. And I mean, not that I'm a farmer, but the point here is diverse crops is what makes a rich soil. And diverse thought, diverse ethnicities are what make our minds and society and culture at large rich. And I'm sitting here taking notes while you guys speak, because I am being enriched by this conversation. The concept of emotional labor, the minute you said it, I was like, oh, I know what that is. Although I've never thought the term, but certainly when you're in the emergency room at 3 a.m. with your 2-year-old, you know what emotional labor is. Or, the challenging the status quo. I guess that's what everyone in this room does every day, is challenge the status quo. If nobody has any other questions at this point, I'd like to go to one of the questions from Pamela Leggett-Hairston, and that we've kind of hit a little bit of this, but how have the disparities within publishing impacted the retention of people in color in higher education? Would you like to start us off with that one, Dr. Leggett-Hairston?
Yes. So as I mentioned previously, and I'm going to use chemistry because that's where I live, right?
And it's a great place to start. Yeah,
it is. So when you're on the tenure track, you come in the door, you understand what the rules of engagement are. Like, you understand how to do this, understand. But what people don't tell you is that there are certain academic publishing companies or journals that you must publish in. Now, some of these have a very low impact. When I say low, like they have a low impact, but you're still required to publish in them. And the amount of work that it takes to publish in them actually defeats the purpose in the publication. And so when you start to look at the tiers of publishing companies, the tiers of journals, that's where the disparities actually start to come in. Because, and I think about this in terms of equity as well, right? So if all the journals were equitable and allowed people just to come in and submit, that would be fine. But that's not the case. And it's almost to the point where people of color have a different level of where they're supposed to publish. I'll give you an example. I found out yesterday that there was this guy out in Oregon, Washington, University of Washington, and he had published in a magazine called Change Magazine. I had never heard of this magazine, like ever in my life, heard of this magazine. But it focuses on change. It focuses on academic change. It focuses on DEI. It focuses on innovation and entrepreneurship. This guy is white. If one of the women from the group had not been in that space, we would have never known that this was a place to publish in. So when we start talking about those different barriers that are in place, it's not just only where we can publish, how we can publish, but do we even know the different publication places? So I do have a newsletter that I put out every 2 weeks of every month. And I try to give people this platform, and it's based on the book, Overcoming Barriers, and it's a free resource. But even still, there are places that I don't know. And so when you're on the tenure track and you don't know where to publish, that's a disparity. That's a discrimination. That's really putting someone at a place that's less equitable than anyone else. If you know I need places to publish because I am in the DEI space, then be equitable and show me where these places are. And use these platforms not to discriminate, but to really think about how we can get the word out. And so I'll give you one more example, and then I'll give the floor to someone else. So even speaking about IGI, and when I was editing the book, I was asking people if they wanted to participate. And there was one young woman, and she had done everything that she needed to do, except when it came time to edit her chapter. And she contacted me and she was like, Dr. Leggett-Robinson, I'm so excited, but so upset. I finally got a tenure track position, but they told me that this book chapter was not in line with what they needed for tenure and promotion. And so coming in with 2 years already under my belt, going up for my 3rd year in the next year, I can no longer participate in this activity.
That's crazy.
And
That's crazy. But those are the disparities that we look at. And because of such, we have to pick and choose where we are going to publish and jump through all the imaginary hoops, because they are imaginary, that people put in our place to overcome those barriers.
And I was just going to touch on that. Do you mind if I ask the
Can
feedback?
Kimetta go first?
Oh, yes, of course. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to add to that. So when I was at the PWI, I had to publish 3 to 4 a year, literally. And you're right. And I'm a qualitative researcher. So let's add that on top of the, on top of the cake, if you want to call it that. But what I've learned at an HBCU, they respect the qualitative researcher because, it's the voice that you want to tell the story through. But it's still that political tenure track stuff going on, well, you need to publish 3. You need to, you can have a book chapter because we're not a research one. So, so it's a little bit different, but you're right. Some people in departments like the STEM departments, arts and sciences, there have been so many women who have gone through tenure track and were denied. And I'm talking anywhere from a lot of number of people, simply because, number one, they're women. how they're publishing, how they're being, they're not publishing in these types of journals that you mentioned. And it really is a disparity in that. And then also it's very true, where to publish, how to publish, and how to guide someone through that process. But as a qualitative researcher, I have heard everything my entire life about how it's devalued and, but I'm sorry. Now I can say I am a 100% qualitative researcher. So I'm going to tell my story. Yeah, I'm going to tell my story. But yes, you're so right. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Brittany.
I was just going to ask Dr. Leggett-Robinson, because we've gotten some feedback from a few researchers about this before, and it's very interesting to me, being a medium-sized publisher, the fact that this did not enable her to work towards tenure. Dr. Leggett-Robinson, did she say in particular the reason why that did not count? I don't know if I caught that.
No, I don't know that I shared it, but she said they viewed it as not scholarly.
Which is very interesting, considering that we're an academic and scholarly publisher that enables the double-blind peer review process. Our research all goes through that rigorous process. That's some feedback we've been getting in general, just because we are a smaller publisher. We do work within researchers worldwide. About 40% of our researchers that publish with us are non-Western, for example. Because we have such a diverse reach, I think sometimes when larger publishers look at and maybe select certain people more from the Western sphere or within the United States specifically to publish, it kind of puts us in a bubble in the publishing industry and doesn't enable more people to, if they have valid, innovative research that goes through the peer review process, is accepted. There is no reason why that shouldn't be considered valid. We're a full member of the International Committee on Publication Ethics.
But Brittany, I will tell you, when I was a junior faculty member, I was discouraged. Do not write any book chapters. Don't write any books. You need to publish scholarly, peer-reviewed journal articles if you're going to make tenure. They actually told me that up front.
Interesting. And we offer both.
And I think it's the combination between that and the combination in Dr. Horton, just the DEI space. So you've got a book chapter in a book that's talking about overcoming barriers. So now we're talking about structures, right? Discriminatory structures that are in place. No one wants to hear that, number one. And then it's a book chapter, and they've already told you in STEM that's not happening for you. So you need to publish in Nature, Science, ACS, whatever area you're in, natural chemistry, some large, journal. But then it comes a time where you do have to have support. And Dr. Hairston, I like what you said, that you have to help people navigate that journey, navigate that publication journey. And so that is one of the things that I help people do, is navigate that journey, show them the different ways that they can publish, think about how their voice can be heard, and help them to elevate that voice. And also help them to realize that space that you may be working in may not be the space for you. It just may not be the space for you, because as an academician, it is our job to show people different voices and to lift up the voices of our students and lift up the voices of everyone else around us. And if we are in an environment that stifles that voice, then it's time to move to a new environment, to publish what we know is true to our soul, and to get that word out.
RaMonda, you wanted to make a comment here?
So I'm nodding my head and amen and everything everybody's saying. But I do want to say that I know that in thinking about new scholars or junior scholars, one of the things, even when I was doing the book, one of the things that I was very much aware of as the editor was who was responding to the call and who I asked. One, because I know all of those systemic barriers that Dr. Leggett-Robinson was talking about, they exist for scholars of color. And I didn't want anybody to feel pressured, particularly junior scholars, even though I know they want to do this work. I also want to be aware of those barriers for them. I also think in thinking about just the area in general and what the book was about, I didn't want to position them in a way that perhaps they would have to deal with hearing from someone on their faculty that that's not going to count or that kind of thing. But I think one of the things that I think that becomes the significant piece to this. So one of the things that when I was sending out the call and when I talked to one of the junior scholars who actually, submitted something for the book, I emphasized the COPE, the whole international COPE thing, that it was double-blind peer review, that if they needed to have the reviews, you can have the reviews. If you need to show somebody that this was double-blind peer review, that kind of thing, because that is the reality that we are currently working in. And it's gonna take a lot to dismantle those kinds of paradigms that people are working from. And when we talk about the DEI work, Dr. Hairston, you brought up the qualitative piece. A lot of what, if we're looking at some of what junior scholars in our field want to do as it relates to addressing DEI, it is going to have to incorporate some of the qualitative and mixed method works that in my field, there's this sort of elitism that that's not valid and that's not valuable. And so it's a lot of the sort of helping to educate people, but it's also making sure that the junior scholars know what the systemic barriers are and why they would want to do it or why they shouldn't, maybe they shouldn't do it. But I would also say, like Dr. Leggett-Robinson said, if this is what you want to do, then how do you support that person in finding the space for the type of work? How do you help them to elevate their voices? And these kinds of opportunities are, I think, good opportunities to have for junior faculty, even if it doesn't count, because it allows them to be able to work on developing that voice, to work on thinking about and reflecting on how do you start to begin to address these systemic issues. And so even thinking about how I came to learn about IGI, I learned about IGI because I had wrote a chapter for someone else's book with IGI. And when I went through the process, I was like, this is just as rigorous a peer review process as I've had to do for some of the journal articles that I submitted. And I thought that what she did a book on case studies in our field. I thought that was something that I for years, I said, somebody needs to put out a book on this. And she jumped and she did it through IGI. And once I went through the process and I started learning about other books that IGI had published on DEI, that was one of the things that made me be like, okay, this is a viable option for me in thinking about it, because we have to deal with a lot of the systemic kinds of things in thinking about when we submit our proposals. What's the positionality of the company and the people that are going to be reviewing our proposals? How are they seeing some of the information that's in our proposal? Is it making them uncomfortable? Those are things that we have to consider because we know that they make a difference in the peer review process at the level of looking at these book proposals. So I think I'm sorry, didn't mean to speak so long, but
No, you're fine.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you brought some really interesting topics. And, one of the things that people in power do, and as a woman, I see men do this all the time. They don't say, I'm sexist. Of course, they're not going to say that. And they're not going to say I'm racist. They're going to say, you just don't get it. And that very like heavy with condescension sneer. And that right there is marginalization. Or what I get a lot online of is men just demanding that I give them my number. Give me your number. Oh, yeah, sure. Right. And they don't even ask. They just, and it's in their head, it's not even a demand. In their head, it's just give me your number. Like that's okay to say. And I just, we feel it all the time. And that might have been a bit of an aside, but that's what people in power do. That publication, no. And that leads us to open source publishing. And the idea of, who says one publication is valuable over another? Who gets to define that? It's probably some white man somewhere. But Brittany, go ahead. You wanted to say something?
Oh, kind of touching on that, but mostly touching on what Dr. Leggett-Robinson had mentioned. Just the fact, that pressure to publish, or even like publish or perish, that whole mentality, and working with the larger publishers, which they put out great content, right? But then the problem becomes, are all those outlets inclusive and diverse? Are once we no longer have, if there's all this pressure to only look at the larger publishers, what's the industry going to do once us small and medium-sized publishers are gone? It's not just us, it's the others, it's the university presses, just something that I like to think of, especially when, yes, absolutely, early career researchers, but then also keeping in mind that those of us, like us with IGI Global, for example, like 99% of our publications are led by those with PhDs. Not to say that graduate level students don't interact with those publications or anything, but the fact that there's conversation out there that, if you're early on in your career, or, if you work for a certain institution or in a certain part of the world, or if you're publishing through a smaller or medium-sized publisher, your research might not be valid, even though it goes through the same processes, the same rigor. Everything that Dr. Leggett-Robinson was saying, it's unfathomable. The idea that there might not be those options in the future, those varied and diverse publishing outlets. That's just a very interesting topic that I wanted to briefly touch on. But you're right, open access research is another avenue that I wanted to ask about, because I know we had kind of talked about it briefly before, and just the idea we were talking earlier, overcoming barriers for dissemination of diverse research, whether that's on topics of diversity or just representing niche or underrepresented topics in general. Or niche or underrepresented researchers. And so I think we could potentially talk about solutions to that, and one of those being the open access movement. I see a lot of that coming into play, like with our open access initiative, for example. It's like a matching investment. Whatever institutions are putting into our e-collections, we give back to them to use for any departments, any faculty that want to publish under open access. They get that matching fund, which is really great overall value, but then actually placing importance on supporting the researchers. And as little as, when we're looking at those smaller collections, that smaller set of funding, making sure that that's available for those who may not have been able to afford to support their researchers, or for researchers who may not have been able to put that towards open access publishing, so it can be freely available to those, say, in other countries who can't afford to acquire that research.
Yes.
So I think open access is an
Robinson
interesting
has a comment about that.
Yes.
Go ahead, Pamela.
I wholeheartedly agree. I think we do need to have a conversation about open access publications and that sort of thing, because it can get to be pretty pricey when you think about it. But there's some that are out there that these institutions would like you to publish in, that are actually open access. And I want to touch a little bit about on what Dr. Horton say, and I applaud the comment about making sure that our junior faculty know exactly what needs to be done. That's very important. That's part of the networking, that's part of mentoring, that's part of serving as a role model. And if we can show them which of these open access journals or publications or companies that they can publish in, I think that would be great. Also letting them know that you can do both. So if you want to work on this portion of your professional development, you can write over here. Doesn't mean that you're going to put this over here, but it does mean that you can develop your voice and you can begin to build traction with that voice, but still do the work over here. Yeah, is it a little bit more work? It can be a little bit more work, but through collaborations with women, with men, globally, it can get done. And I think we need to really start thinking about it in terms of collaborations and how we can help each other. I like the co-rising, Dr. Ashe, I really like that. And I think if we begin to really co-rise and network and support each other through these publications, you know, if Dr. Horton, if you have a couple of young women or even young men that want to write in the DEI space, your name is out there. You can add them in there, right? And pull them along, but remind them, hey, but I also need you to publish here as well, because then that builds their academic credentials, if you will, right? And so I really like both of those comments, and I hope that addresses your comment, Brittany, as well on open access.
Yeah, I just think it's interesting too that some individuals in academic publishing kind of frown upon open access publishing, which is interesting because it'll go through the exact same process, that peer review, and just in general, the open access movement makes it so much more equitable to access that content. But sometimes that research might be considered not as rigorous, not as valid, which is very interesting. Like for us, the only difference is that it's then opened up afterwards. It goes through the same peer review. I don't know if you have any thoughts on the validity of open access research more so.
I don't even think I think it's all that, but I also think it comes with a name. And people recognize names. And when you're talking about structures that have been in place, so like everyone knows who the Rockefellers are, like you know that. Everyone knows what nature is. Everyone, and I'm just speaking from the STEM perspective, let me just say that. Everyone knows if you're in higher ed, you know AACU, like you know these names, they're like staples. And so imagine you haven't been able to get in that space because your name is not as large as the Rockefellers. And I think a lot of times it has to do with that. And we just have to keep plugging away and keep removing those bricks and keep adding our own bricks so that the publishing arena is no longer just one red brick. Like it's got the blue IGI brick over here. It's got an open access brick of yellow over here. It's got a green brick of somebody else over here. It's got Quaint Revolt, which is like I came upon Quaint Revolt, like this young woman, African-American woman from Atlanta has started this publishing company. It's very, very small. It's not educational resources, so let me just say that. But nonetheless, so now you've got a Quaint Revolt over there. You've got this over there, another open access. So that's what we have to do. We have to just start inserting our bricks one by one by one by one, so that the publishing landscape now looks very, very different than that all red brick. And it's just going to take time. I just say keep plugging away, and anything we can do to help with that, I'm sure we can do.
I love the visual on the colors of bricks, and it reminds me what we're talking about right now reminds me, ironically, since we're on Facebook, of Mark Zuckerberg, and he's recently been indicted for inciting violence in Myanmar and one other country. I can't remember what country, but here's a white man who sets his algorithms for anger. Let's make anger a big deal because that anger sells. And you know, this video might not be very popular because there's not a lot of anger going on. There's a lot of mutual support. And why do we get to decide? Why does he get to decide to do that? And it's just so aggravating. And what I loved about what Pamela said is that's a solution. Just keep inserting your brick, your voice. Just keep putting it in there. And these are solutions. And I love to be focused on solutions, not just here's the problem. And I'm a qualitative researcher too, Dr. Hairston. And yeah, I get that you're a qualitative researcher. And I have great respect for chemists because that's like the STEM fields are really a whole nother world than what I'm in. I don't want to spend too much more time, but I did want to mention something that's dear to my heart. And I worked for many years as an editor on, the name of the journal escapes me right now, but it was about the eradication of Indigenous languages, and it was a support for Indigenous languages. And as I've worked with a lot of scholars from around the world whose native language is not English. And I've done that for free forever, just helping them to be able to put their voice in this dense language. And because they have so many great things to offer. And when I was working for that Indigenous Languages Journal, there was one scholar who was from, I can't remember the name of the country in Africa, but his native language was Wolof, which is primarily an oral language. And the hurdles for somebody like that who, until the age of 17, they did not speak a language that's written, means whole avenues of expression are limited. And so this scholar then went on to learn, after they learned, French was their first written language that they learned when they were like 17. And then that scholar went on to get a PhD in English, not the topic of English, but via the medium of English. And they went to China to study one of the remote Indigenous languages. There used to be 126 Indigenous languages in China. How many are there now? 2. So the Chinese government was very good at eradicating Indigenous languages. But so this scholar was writing, and in like, I don't know, his 5th language, and it was about a language that's really remote in China. And so the amount of languages that are going on in this man's head were really impressive. And his research was super impressive. And we and the editorial staff was doing everything we could to get all of these people like him published in this respected journal. And I sent him, well, first I spoke with the other editors and I said, you know, I have like 10 pages of edits for him, very impressed with his work, but it's not publishable in the way that it is. And I was so sad that we sent him these edits, and like really some of what he was saying was incomprehensible, unfortunately, despite its value. And he refused them all. He said, no, my English is just fine. And he was unable to be published. And I was so sad, because here we were, and this is why I give away the English language as much as I can to scholars all over the world. But he just refused it. And I don't know whatever happened to him. But the point of that story is to go on to the idea, why does all academic publishing have to be in English? Are you working on other languages, Brittany?
So no, we do currently only publish in English, but that's a really interesting topic because of the fact, because that's something we keep in mind. We work with international researchers. English is not always their first language. So when something comes through and an editor sees value and it goes through the peer review process and they accept something from someone who English might not be their first language, and there might be some not traditional standard English. There's so many variations of it. So we have to keep that in mind, of course, but it might come through and there'll be questions about, you know, if that should have been included. Sometimes it's really hard for the editor. They're like, hey, I did not want to change. What they're saying here might not be exact, perfect English, but if I change this sentence or this part of what he's putting in this research paper, in this chapter, in this article, it will lose its research meaning. It is, so we have to keep in mind, of course, quality. It's up to the editors to make sure that that research is quality. We also offer things like author services for that kind of issue. But it's also important to keep in mind, yeah, English is the primary language of academic research. Should we really be punishing individuals whose English might not be exactly perfect, but the research is there, the credentials are valid, they definitely know what they're talking about, it's gone through the peer review, and the editor of the book or the journal itself has decided this is very innovative, this has gone through the peer review process, I'm including it. These are just questions to keep in mind. Sometimes when we have things like that, there's questions of quality, but we have to keep in mind, it's always quality first, of course, but we need to kind of keep this in mind, that it's not very inclusive to discriminate against individuals because maybe a sentence in English wasn't
Right.
perfect standard English. So that's definitely an interesting topic that we like to touch on.
Go ahead, Dr. Hairston.
Now, I was just going to say, ironically, one of my authors is from South Africa, and we had this same, discussion. Should we change? I said, if we change the meaning of what he's saying, it's going to take away from everything, his Black experience, right? So we actually kept that chapter in the book. He's the only international author in the book. And we had the same conversation that we're having right now. You have to give this person a chance. His story is valid. And I had one peer editor who was like, I'm having a hard time reading this, but I'm intrigued and I'm interested. Can I get another week? And I'm like, sure. It took him a minute to really think about what he was saying. But if you read the whole chapter, he absolutely did an amazing job. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, that's a great point. The quality has to be there, but you also have to keep in mind their experience and what they're actually saying.
Some of my most rewarding work was with groups of Iraqi scholars. They came here, and I did this all as a volunteer because they were such wonderful students. They were PhD students, and their topics were like, one of them was how the marshes were drained in Iraq by Saddam Hussein, and at that point, it was the recovery of the marshes. It was invaluable work at the highest level. And very rewarding was to sit with them and say, well, this sentence could mean this, or it could mean this. Which one do you want to say? And then we together, we wouldn't leave a sentence that was valuable, but not discernible, or you couldn't understand what they were saying. And we would spend hours and hours poring over these phrases that that you couldn't really figure out what they were saying, and then we would rewrite everything, and it was just wonderful work, and elevating their English and elevating diversity of scholarship. It's very rewarding work, but not monetarily. And the other part of that is, you don't want these people that they've jumped through so many hurdles to begin with, and they have such resilience. A lot of the people that I work with come from war-torn countries, and they have seen war. They have lived through war, and they've overcome it. And the only thing they want to do is rebuild their country. And then we're going to make them spend more money because their English isn't good enough. That really aggravates me. So I've spent a lot of my own time just helping scholars in that situation. We have gone on for over an hour. And it's been very interesting, and I'm happy to do this again. But before we go, to all of my friends in other countries, I want to give Brittany a chance to tell you all of the areas that they are seeking seeking authors in. And I think that, Brittany, you have a slide that. And can you talk a little bit about opportunities where people can become authors?
Absolutely. Let me pull my screen back up, because I know the great thing is everyone involved on this call, we appreciate you so much for your titles are all included in our diversity, equity, and inclusion ebook collection. And we're continuously seeking research on those topics from qualified individuals, experts in this field. Like I said, if you have an innovative idea, as I'm looking to share my screen and technology is not being my friend at the moment, if you're looking to publish in your field where you have experience, you have that innovative idea, we're not the ones, as long as it goes through that peer review process, as long as you have your credentials to back up your expertise in that area, we are a great option to come to. And I think we kind of touched on that earlier. So these are some of the areas, our DEI ebook collection, and just our publications in general, they're all transdisciplinary. These are some of the major areas that our acquisitions team is actively seeking from researchers who are qualified to write upon these topics. So whether that be sexual identity and orientation, body politics and media has been an increasing topic, accessibility, which I know we touched on earlier, that is ever important and will only continue to be so. You can learn more about publishing with us at the link here below, and I'm sure we'll have these slides available for everyone. But certainly come check out our publishing with us. I know we've worked with all of you lovely ladies, and it's been a great experience. And just touching upon what you were just saying, Jesse, these all, of course, go through that peer review process. They're either in our book publications or our scholarly journals. And then it does have to get accepted, of course. And that's the thing. It's up to the editors to determine that quality. It has to go through that peer review process. But we do not discriminate based on sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, gender, sex, anything in that regard. We are looking for that quality research, whether it be niche, underrepresented, innovative. We're a great option to come to. So just wanted to make sure.
Worth noting that we all of the people in this room have felt very supported by IGI in the publishing process.
That's great to hear. And we always welcome that kind of feedback too. How can we even streamline the publishing process? We have a quick turnaround right now on our book publications. They're published in tandem with our journal publications that are semi-annual, that 7 to 10 month turnaround time. As long as you have that kind of mentality of, I have a solid publishing plan, you work with us on it, that's where we kind of come into play. And I just wanted to take a beat to congratulate all of you on being like really key features in our DEI ebook collection too. This is available. I am not here to sell anything today, but I did want to let everyone know that these titles are all part of this collection, which, features contributors from over 700 researchers, over 30 plus countries. We're making sure, we really want to make sure that this kind of content is accessible, that it's all looped together, easy for libraries to give to their patrons too, or researchers to access in an affordable manner. So that's what kind of prompted us to put this together this year, because like I said, from our inception, this has been a really key component, a really important topic for us. So I did just want to bring this up in the fact that, it's such a pleasure to work with you all. Definitely wanting to have more conversations, not just about the DEI ebook collection. Like, sure, we'd love to make sure that all these books are getting into all the libraries, but let's just have the DEI conversations. And we need to be having them in academic publishing with the libraries directly, with the researchers and their libraries. We all need to have kind of this dialogue that we're having today to make sure that the publishing industry for academic publishing is advancing, is changing, is adapting to these needs that you all have brought up today. I think that's really interesting.
Bricks and yellow bricks and orange bricks, and all kinds of bricks.
Yeah, it's just the conversations need to be had. As a medium-sized publisher, sometimes it's even hard for us to kind of get that seat at the table to kind of have that conversation. Just seeing what's happening at your university, what is your library like focusing on? What do your researchers need? What are you looking at with the open access movement? These are all topics. Just having the conversations are important. They're really critical.
Okay, if you'll stop screen sharing for just a minute, Brittany, I think we'll let the last screen be everybody's contact information. But
yes.
I wanted to first start by thanking everyone for being here and giving everyone an opportunity to say their goodbyes. So in no particular order, I'll start with Dr. Kimetta Hairston. Thank you for being here today. And do you have any closing remarks?
I just want to say thank you for the opportunity in meeting these other ladies. I'm really always impressed by all women, because the work is the work. And in order to get the work done, we have to really stay focused. We have to be uplifting. We have to listen to each other and not tear each other down, and just really respect each other's space. So thank you for this opportunity. Happy holidays. Be safe. And once again, thank you. Thank you. Nice meeting everybody.
Yes. Okay. So I'll go down to Dr. Horton. Thank you for being here today. And do you have any closing remarks?
Just thank you. I just want to echo the sentiments that Dr. Hairston noted. It's just so wonderful to be around people who really understand these issues and have these conversations and be connected, because I think it's important to establish that community of people that are doing this work that you can reach out to and that kind of thing. And so I just appreciate being a part of this panel.
Thank you. And last but not least, Dr. Leggett-Robinson, thank you for being here today, taking time from your family. And do you have any closing remarks?
Once again, I just echo everything the other ladies said. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's always great to share space with like-minded people. And as I always tell people, regardless of the circumstance, keep smiling and keep pushing your agenda.
Yes.
That's all we can do. So happy holidays.
Yeah, you've left us with a wonderful visual of all of those bricks. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to let Brittany share the slide of our contact information, and that will be our goodbye. And I'll say happy holidays to everyone.
Yep. Jesse, thank you so much for organizing this.
It's been a real joy. Thank you, Brittany, for being here.
Of course. And then everyone should be able to see everyone's contact information. Feel free to email us with questions. We want to further this conversation.
Okay, and I'm going to stop the live stream now.